It happened on a Wednesday. Hot, loud, packed. Zohran Mamdani stood on a folding chair just outside the subway station on Broadway and Steinway. No podium, no sound system. Just a microphone clipped to his collar and a few volunteers handing out flyers about rent control. He was in mid-sentence something about a housing bill stalled in committee when it happened. From the other side of the street, a man in a navy polo sunglasses and a Yankees cap shouted, "Go back to Pakistan, you commie bastard!" There was a moment, not even a second, where everything paused. The crowd turned. Volunteers froze. The mic caught wind. And Zohran, he didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just stood there. Then he adjusted the mic, looked straight ahead, and said calmly, "I'm from Queens, born in New York, and I'm here for the tenants who just got hit with a 40% rent hike." No applause, no comeback line, just that. The man scoffed and walked off. But a kid couldn't have been older than 12, tugged his dad's sleeve and whispered, "Dad." Why'd he call him that? The father didn't answer. Because how do you explain hatred, that lazy... That clip, 41 seconds long, went viral. But not because of the insult. It was the silence. That held longer than anyone expected. That said more than any speech could. Because here was a man being called every name in the Cold War playbook. And he didn't respond with fire. He responded with focus. That wasn't the first time someone called him a communist. It wouldn't be the last. He'd heard it from angry landlords, from wealthy donors, even from cable news pundits who'd never set foot in Astoria. It was meant to be an insult, a dismissal, a label to discredit, a scarlet letter to brand him with fear. But Zohran Mamdani didn't run from it. He turned toward it. That Wednesday became a turning point not because of the words thrown at him, but because of what he did next. He didn't fight back in kind. He didn't correct the insult. He took that word communist and let it sit there. Let it echo. Let it expose more about the people using it than the man they tried to tear down. They said he was radical, un-American, too brown, too foreign, too young. But what if they were wrong? What if the real danger wasn't what Zohran believed? But how deeply he believed it. In housing, in justice, in dignity for people too tired to ask for it anymore. This wasn't a story about a slur. It was about what happens when you wear the insult they give you. Not as shame, but as signal. Because the man they called a communist, he didn't hide. He took the mic. He didn't look like the others. No Harvard pin, no family legacy, no Wall Street resume. Just khakis, rolled up sleeves, and the kind of face that made some voters squint and ask, "So, where are you really from?" His answer never changed. Queens. But that wasn't enough for some. Not when his platform included phrases like rent forgiveness, free healthcare, abolish ICE. The labels came fast. Radical, leftist, commie. Not behind his back. To his face. And the media, they didn't help. Local tabloids called him Astoria's AOC. One conservative blog dubbed him the Red Prince of Queens. Cable news hosts chuckled through segments, tossing his image beside Soviet flags, as if proposing tenant protections made you a threat to the Republic. But it wasn't just the right. Even Democrats distanced themselves. Party insiders warned donors not to back him. Volunteers were asked to scrub his name from endorsement pages. One senior assembly member told a reporter off record, "We don't need another socialist making trouble." In Albany, he was a ghost before he ever got sworn in. And yet Mamdani kept showing up, knocking doors in 90-degree heat, hosting town halls in laundromats, translating flyers into Bangla, Arabic, and Spanish by hand. He didn't shout, didn't rant, he just showed up, again and again. And the more he showed up, the more the label followed. One landlords association sent out a mailer. "Your property rights are under attack. Say no to communism. Say no to Zohran Mamdani." A church group circulated a petition calling him morally dangerous. But here's the thing. Not one of them debated his policies. They debated his name, his face, his supposed foreignness. The word communist wasn't about economics anymore. It was a warning flare, a signal that someone was thinking too differently and doing it too loudly. In one community meeting, a man stood up and asked, "What gives you the right to represent us?" Zohran didn't pause. He said, "I knock the same doors as you. I breathe the same air. I pay the same rent. That's what gives me the right." The room went quiet. But not because he won, because no one expected him to stay standing. Behind the speeches, the slurs, and the fear, something deeper was happening. People were listening, maybe not agreeing, but listening. And for someone like Zohran Mamdani, that was a beginning. In Albany, he sat alone, not metaphorically, literally, in the assembly chamber, while senior members clustered in party rows, whispering strategy and trading notes. Zohran Mamdani sat 2 chairs from the back, often a lone yellow legal pad in hand. His desk was neat. No framed family photo, no NY Yankees mug. Just stacks of policy printouts, rent data eviction stats, transit fare audits, numbers that screamed. But no one wanted to listen. His first bill, a simple proposal, cap annual rent increases in publicly subsidized housing. It didn't even make it to debate. No co-sponsors, no committee interest, no support from the very party he ran under. He asked one fellow Democrat why. The answer was blunt. "Your ideas are good, but you're poison right now." Sorry. So he stopped trying to fit in. He stopped going to the fancy fundraisers, stopped waiting for an invite to the table. Instead, he built a new one. People's office hours, he called them. Not in downtown offices. In bodegas. In church basements. At subway exits. Where people actually lived. He brought coffee. Folding chairs flyers in 5 languages. No media, no headlines. Just him and anyone who had something to say. A nurse who couldn't afford insulin. A cab driver facing foreclosure. A teacher moonlighting as a delivery driver. They didn't always agree with him. But they came back, not because of ideology, because he showed up. He kept a notebook. He didn't write quotes. He wrote needs. Page after page. 3 kids, $1,900, rent 1 bathroom. Mom undocumented, scared of ER. Lost apartment after job, cut now couch surfing. He read those pages more than any policy brief, because those weren't stats. They were stories, and they mattered more than his reputation in Albany ever would. Still, the label followed him. At every committee hearing, every press mention, every debate. They didn't call him Assemblyman Mamdani. They called him the socialist from Queens, the guy who wants free everything, the commie kid. And when he tried to speak, they rolled their eyes, checked their phones, smiled politely until time ran out. But he didn't stop. Not when bills failed, not when donors fled, not when people whispered terrorist as he walked into the Capitol cafeteria. Because the truth was, he expected it. He knew what the system feared most. Not noise, not chaos, but conviction. Unshakable, inconvenient, contagious conviction. And that's what he carried. Alone. At first, but not for long. It started with a banana. Outside a bodega in Jackson Heights, Mamdani handed a flyer to an elderly woman. She waved it away. "Communist," she muttered. But a block later, she circled back. She didn't want a debate. She didn't want politics. She handed him a banana from her bag and said, "You're the first one to stop here since 2012, and walked away. He stood there, banana in hand, and knew something had shifted. That week, he held office hours at a laundromat on 31st Avenue. Plastic chairs, vending machine hummed the scent of fabric softener in the air. 6 people showed up. By the 3rd week, 30? Not all supporters. A construction worker asked if Mamdani wanted to ban private property. A retired teacher warned about Venezuela. But they stayed. Because unlike everyone else they'd seen on TV, Mamdani didn't talk at them. He asked questions. "What's your rent? How far is the hospital from your house? Do you feel safe at night?" And he listened, fully. Not with talking points, with presence. One day at a housing town hall, a man stood up. White, mid-50s, retired cop. He said, "I hated you when you ran. Thought you were gonna ruin this place." The room tensed. Then he added, "But my daughter's a teacher. Her school got new books this year, finally. You helped push that budget." He paused. "She doesn't like you, but she respects you. That's something." He sat down. Nobody clapped, but Mamdani nodded. "That's something," he said. "Let's keep building from that." Behind the scenes, staffers began noticing something unusual. People weren't just calling the office to complain. They were calling to help. A 19-year-old offered to translate flyers into Nepali. A single mom offered to babysit during town halls. A bartender asked to donate half his tips for campaign printing costs. This wasn't politics. It was a movement. And it didn't care what he was called. Because something funny happens when you listen long enough. People stop shouting. They start sharing. They stop labeling. They start leaning in. And in that quiet shift from rejection to recognition, Mamdani found the spark again. Not in applause, in eye contact. Not in slogans, in stories. The fire didn't go out. It just changed form. The mic was never handed to him. He didn't inherit it, didn't buy it, didn't charm his way into it. He built it, piece by piece, from scratch, from nothing. The first time Zohran Mamdani took the floor at a full assembly session, he didn't get a podium. He was given 2 minutes. Most members used that time to offer ceremonial words, shout-outs, birthdays, vague community updates. Mamdani stood up with a stack of eviction notices. All from his district, all real, all recent. He held them up one by one. This one Astoria, $2.400. This one Ditmars, $3.100. This one Elmhurst, $2.900. He read the names, the ages, the rents, the unpaid balances. By the time his 2 minutes were up, the chamber was silent. Someone tried to gavel him down. But he looked them in the eye and said, if telling the truth takes too long, maybe the problem isn't my clock. It's your comfort. That clip went viral too. But not in the way political clips usually do. It didn't spark outrage. It sparked action. Tenant unions began quoting his speech on flyers. A local rapper sampled his voice in a mixtape. Churches asked to reprint his remarks in bulletins. And most surprisingly, high school teachers reached out asking for copies of his speech to use in civics class. Not because it was radical, because it was real. Because in a world where politicians spun words into fog, Mamdani named what was actually happening. Without apology, without sugar. And the more people heard it, the more they stopped caring about the label. The word communist lost its sting when their asthma medication got cheaper. Lost its heat when their cousin got approved for rental assistance. Lost its punch when they realized the man behind the mic actually knew their names. It wasn't that the system welcomed him. It didn't. It still mocked him behind closed doors, still excluded him from key committees, still rolled its eyes when he spoke. But now it had to listen, because he no longer needed the room to believe in him. The people did. They said he was just a protest vote, a phase, a fluke. But as his words reached further, as his influence spread, they realized something. The mic was never theirs to give. And now, they couldn't take it back. It was budget season, Albany's favorite time to pretend urgency. Lawmakers shuffled papers, whispered about re-elections, slipped out for photo ops. But Zohran Mamdani sat still. At the far end of the chamber, one hand on his folder, the other on a printed utility bill. It belonged to a woman named Maritza. Single mom, 2 jobs, 3 kids. Her Con Ed bill was $684 for 1 month. The envelope was still smudged with her fingerprints. She'd cried while handing it to his staff. I pay, I work, I follow rules, still drowning. When Mamdani's turn came, he didn't give a speech. He didn't posture. He walked to the front, unfolded the paper, and said, "This is what energy poverty looks like. You may not feel it, but your vote decides it." One assembly member whispered, "Is this the socialist show again?" Someone else reached for their phone. But Mamdani wasn't talking to them. He was talking to the camera, to the people watching from living rooms, classrooms, laundromats, to Maritza. He held up the bill. "This isn't an anomaly, it's policy. And we wrote it." He listed the numbers, the rate hikes, the corporate profits, the campaign donations that made it possible. Silence. Then the gavel. "Your time is up, Assemblyman." He stepped back, folded the bill, nodded. But that 90-second moment cracked something. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical, and it spread. Within 48 hours, tenant rights groups were quoting him. Local media ran with the headline, "A socialist names what others won't." His inbox flooded not with hate, with stories. More bills, more names, more people who'd never written to a politician in their lives. They didn't ask for ideology. They asked, "Can you help?" In response, Mamdani reintroduced the Energy Equity Act. It had failed twice before. This time it didn't pass either. But something was different. 2 Democrats who'd mocked him 6 months earlier signed on. A union that once ignored him tweeted support. Even a conservative upstate rep said quietly in the hall, "I don't like your politics, but you care. I see it." That mattered. Because politics doesn't change when you win votes. It changes when you change what's possible to say aloud. And Mamdani had just made truth, unvarnished, uncomfortable truth, possible again. The room still didn't want him. But it couldn't ignore him anymore. Because while others politicked, he showed receipts. While others promised, he read the fine print. While others smirked, he served. And the people? They noticed. Not with cheers, with calls, with questions, with trust. And that's power. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. It started in Brooklyn. A 25-year-old barista, frustrated by rent hikes, stood up at a neighborhood meeting and said, "I don't want a politician who promises change. I want one who shows up with a folding chair." She was quoting Mamdani. Not from a campaign ad, not from a slogan, from a clip she saw him holding office hours outside a grocery store in the rain, with 2 constituents under a shared umbrella. The image stuck. Because it wasn't polished, it was persistent. Soon, other young candidates began borrowing from his playbook. No big donors, no consultants, just volunteers. Language-accessible flyers. A list of problems and a plan. In the Bronx, a teacher ran on a Mamdani-style housing platform. In Buffalo, an Uber driver launched a grassroots campaign citing Mamdani's energy bill as inspiration. Even in upstate New York, where socialist was still a dirty word, candidates whispered, "If Zohran can do it in Queens." The media tried to box it in. They called it the socialist surge. They asked if this was just Bernie 2.0, but they missed the point. This wasn't about left versus right. It was about remembered versus ignored. And Mamdani had become the blueprint for the ignored to organize. Meanwhile, inside Albany, the shift grew louder. 3 legislators once dismissive of him now held weekly policy meetings in his office. They weren't socialists. They were tired of pretending the system still worked. Tired of press releases with no teeth. Tired of asking donors before asking their constituents. And Mamdani, he welcomed them. Not with arrogance, with binders. Data, testimonies, drafts, because this wasn't about ideology. It was about infrastructure. And that's what Mamdani had quietly built. While they mocked his style, he built systems. They called him a joke. He became a blueprint. Because the people he listened to, they didn't want charisma. They wanted consistency. They didn't want revolution. They wanted rent relief. They didn't want theory. They wanted someone who knew how it felt to run out of asthma meds before payday. The pundits laughed, but the people showed up. To meetings, to mutual aid drives, to school board elections. And slowly the phrase democratic socialist didn't spark fear. It sparked familiarity. Because Mamdani didn't redefine the term. He redefined who it was for. And once people saw themselves in it, they stopped laughing and started organizing. The banner went up on a cloudy Tuesday morning. It wasn't planned. A group of tenants, mostly seniors, mostly invisible to cameras, had printed it overnight. They stretched it across the iron gate of their rent-stabilized building in Astoria. White letters on red cloth. Zohran got it done. No hashtags, no party logos. Just truth. The night before the New York Assembly had passed the Tenant Emergency Relief Act. After 4 years of committee deaths, budget slashes, and procedural games, it made it. It capped rent hikes, expanded eviction protection, created a public legal fund for housing court defense. The sponsor, Zohran Mamdani. When the vote passed, he didn't raise his arms or smile wide. He just exhaled deep slow, like someone who hadn't breathed in years. Reporters asked him what changed. He didn't talk about strategy. He said, "People remembered how to push. I just made sure Albany couldn't ignore them." The story ran front page in City and State, from outsider to architect. But the better quote came from a tenant in Elmhurst. They used to call him a communist. Now my grandkid has heat in the winter. Not everyone celebrated. Some lawmakers warned this bill would destabilize the market. Donors threatened to pull funding. Commentators called it the beginning of property socialism. But the people who mattered, They called it breathing room. And breathing room is radical when you've been suffocating for decades. That month, something else happened. A woman stopped Mamdani outside a grocery store. She wore a uniform from a local hospital. Didn't say much, just handed him a folded sheet of paper. Inside was a handwritten note. "You came to my son's school. He was 10. You talked about justice like it wasn't a dirty word. He's 14 now. Wants to be a lawyer. You gave him that." Mamdani kept the note, folded it into his wallet, carried it into every vote, because laws change cities, but stories, they change memory. And he knew legacy isn't what you build for people. It's what they build because you showed them they could. They laughed. They called him names. They drew cartoons with hammers and sickles. But now, they hang banners with his name, not because he wanted glory, because he wouldn't sit down. He never chased applause. He chased accountability. And that became landmark. They called him a communist like it was a curse, but he never flinched, because he knew something they didn't. The word wasn't about him. It was about control. The fear wasn't that he'd fail. It was that he might work, that a brown man with no donors, no dynasty, no decorum, could actually deliver. And if he could, what did that say about them? That label communist, it wasn't just political shorthand. It was a warning to others like him. Don't think big, don't push hard, don't care too loudly. Stay in line. But Mamdani stepped out of line, and stayed out, because he understood something essential. Labels only stick if you shrink to fit them. But he never shrank. They said he was un-American. He knocked doors harder. They said he was radical. He read more laws. They said he was naive. He studied budgets until 2 a.m. He didn't fight the label. He outgrew it, and in doing so made it irrelevant. The threat wasn't the word communist. The threat was a man who made empathy executable, who made justice measurable, who made people believe that government could still be a verb, not just a building. In Queens, a high school civics class did a role play pass a housing bill. The winning team quoted Mamdani's assembly speech line for line. At graduation, the teacher said, "For the first time, our students didn't want to be president. They wanted to be organizers." The label didn't defeat him. It activated him. It clarified who he was and who he wasn't afraid to be. And that made him dangerous. Not to democracy, to indifference, to delay, to performative politics, to cynicism dressed as pragmatism. They thought calling him a communist would shut him up. Instead, it reminded him who he fought for, and why silence was never an option. They used to snicker when they said his name. Late-night hosts, columnists, even his own colleagues behind closed doors. "Here comes the revolution. Hide your wallets, the commie's in the room. Is he wearing Chaseox today?" He smiled, because he knew something they hadn't figured out yet. The joke wouldn't age well. It started slowly. A colleague who once avoided him quietly asked for help drafting rent policy. A campaign staffer from a moderate district requested his talking points on medical debt. A news outlet one that once called him a Marxist in Manhattan asked for a guest column. No one said you were right. They didn't have to. They just stopped laughing. Because somewhere between the slurs and the silence, people began to notice a pattern. When Mamdani spoke, facts showed up. When he proposed a bill, it had receipts. When he talked to voters, they remembered what he said. He wasn't loud. He was steady. And in a world obsessed with outrage steadiness, that's revolution. By year 5, the younger candidates weren't just quoting him. They were emulating his entire model. Knock doors, skip donors, show up, take notes, write laws that matter. Don't flinch when they call you names. A city council candidate in the Bronx opened her campaign speech with, "They called Mamdani a joke. That joke kept my grandma in her apartment." The room erupted. No one laughed. Mamdani wasn't a phenomenon anymore. He was precedent, and precedent is powerful, because it doesn't demand permission. It sets expectation. When the joke becomes the standard, it's not funny anymore. It's foundational. It shifts the Overton window. It rewrites what's acceptable. And most of all, it makes people wonder, if he can do that with no money, no legacy, no invitation, what's stopping me? That's why the laughter stopped. Because he didn't change for the system. He changed what the system had to account for. And that is how a whisper becomes a wind. A joke becomes a movement, and a movement becomes memory. The first time they called him a communist, he paused. Not because he was afraid, but because he'd heard worse, much worse. And he knew, names don't define you. What you do next does. Zohran Mamdani didn't flinch, didn't fold. He built, brick by brick. From church basements, from bodega conversations, from bills that almost passed. And then did. He took every label, every insult, every dismissal, and used them like scaffolding. And on that scaffold he raised something rare, a politics that listened first, spoke last, and never forgot who sent him. So here's the call. Not to agree with everything he stands for, not to change your party, not to chant or tweet. Just this, next time someone gets labeled mocked, minimized, don't look away. Ask, what are they really afraid of? And if what that person's fighting for sounds like decency, dignity, or basic survival, then maybe it's not them we should be laughing at. Maybe it's us for waiting so long to join them. They gave him a label to silence him. He used it as a megaphone. They tried to make him a punchline. He became a blueprint. They thought he'd disappear. But now, his echo's everywhere, because Zohran Mamdani didn't rewrite politics. He reminded us what it could be before we forgot. And if they ever call you radical smile, it means you're still close to something real. And real always returns.